mind, body, soul, and spirit need all the help that we can get. And so it's going to be our honor tonight, privilege, to welcome Phil Herndon. Phil's a licensed professional counselor, mental health service provider, national certified counselor. He uses a dynamic approach to help his clients recover their hearts and redeem their stories. His therapeutic approach is grounded. Do we have audio now? Okay. Phil, like I said, Phil is a licensed professional counselor, mental health service provider, national certified counselor. Phil uses a dynamic approach to help clients recover their hearts and redeem their stories, and he deals with things like addiction, anxiety, depression, struggles with spirituality, grief, trauma, different things that people are walking through tumultuous and scary times. Phil worked in the trucking business through college and after college until realizing his true passion was helping people walk through difficulties and heartache. He completed graduate school in 1992 with Master of Arts degrees in counseling and religious education, served as a pastor in Texas for 15 years until joining Center for Professional Excellence in 2005, where he has served as clinical director unto the present. And Phil lives in Murfreesboro with his wife Sheila, and they have one son, Luke, and he's a Georgia Bulldog fan as well. I'm going to ask tonight, and Phil has agreed to this, if you have any questions, send it to my email, and we will get to those if time permits. djpreachit@me.com. djpreachit@me.com. That's the easiest email to send it to. djpreachit@me.com. It's an honor to have Phil with us tonight. Phil, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here, Pastor.
So time flies, and we're going to get as much in as we can tonight. If I skip around, we're doing it on purpose, and Phil knows that. COVID-19, I want to begin with this. So everybody claims how busy we were before, and that COVID for the last almost 2 months has slowed us down. But yet for some it didn't eliminate stress, because some have lost their jobs, some have had COVID itself, some have uncertainty, fears of this, fears of that. It's exposed certain things of fears. What's the future look like? So I want Phil to begin as we start tonight. How does a person navigate, whether it's the COVID crisis, pandemic, or anything else in their lives, for that matter, that just hits them out of the blue like this did, that causes so much panic?
You know, Pastor, there's even if you look at the physical copy of the Bible, just Genesis through Revelation, and you maybe the first two chapters are a world where there's no pain, no heartache, there's nothing wrong, and no need for grief and sadness and all that kind of stuff. And then toward the back of it, depending on one's end time beliefs, there's 2 or 3 chapters maybe at the back of that Bible that depict a time when it's going to be that way again. And all those pages between those 2 places are heartache and struggle and warfare and lust and quarrel and violence and man against man. It's just a really rough go. And there's a phrase we've used for years that says that life is tragic and God is faithful. So both of those things are true at the same time.
Wow, that's good.
And so, this pandemic has so many scary words. The word pandemic itself, $1 trillion bailouts and virus and death. And so it's really brought a ton of fear into the world. And so you're right. Like, regardless of pandemic or not, what this thing has done, it has lifted the veil on how vulnerable we are all the time anyway.
Yes.
And so, nothing has changed in terms of mankind's vulnerability between Genesis 2 and the end of Revelation, but certainly our recognition of it and a more real threat in the form of a real virus has really brought to light and really highlighted how vulnerable we are. We're vulnerable people.
Yes, we are. So we were told, suggested, shut in, can't do this, can't go there. But, and this is not me making this up, we're seeing a terrible increase in depression, anxiety issues, calls to the suicide hotline and suicide themselves. Speak to that. Why? Or in your theory.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned the word anxiety, and that's been a big key word these days. And anxiety really is just a form of fear that's not recognized at a heart level. You know, we're made to have fear because it's a dangerous place. We're made to experience fear. That's where we get discernment. When our children are little and they're playing out in the yard, if a ball bounces into the street, we want them to feel fear and cry out to mommy and daddy.
Right.
And so our Lord says, you know, well, cry out to me in your fear, so your faith can be made whole in me, and you can have rescue and deliverance. Well, what happens is we experience fear, and in our humanness, we want to take charge of it ourselves. And so our bodies take over. Fear is really a physiological reaction to fear. We sweat, our heart races, sometimes break out in hives, GI distress. I mean, the body sends huge signals that we're scared. And so it also comes in the form of manipulation or worry or obsession or preoccupation. And so the idea is that, I'm shut in, my freedom is lacking, and so what am I going to do about it? So rather than name what the fear is, our bodies take over and we worry and fret and do all kinds of things to try to make ourselves unafraid. When the scriptures say, hey, cry out to me in your fear.
Now listen to this.
You know, cry out to me in that. And so if you human fathers and mothers desire your children to cry out to you and you're afraid, how much more in my perfection do I want my children to do the same thing? And so we get fear and anxiety confused, and so we're shut in, and people really start, the old word is freaking out. People start freaking out because they're attempting to take care of their fear by themselves.
That's it.
And so they're thank the Lord, they're calling suicide hotline, and then people are also doing self-harm to themselves or harming other people that they live with, and in their fear, they're not doing, honestly, Pastor, what there's a beautiful yet painful example in Scripture. The prophet Jeremiah, what a weeping prophet, what a name he had, but he was weeping because he grieved over and over, and finally the Lord made good on what he said was going to happen, and the Babylonians came in and sacked his beloved Jerusalem, and he's walking around the ruins in Lamentations, and he's just lamenting, and lament is a verbal expression of grief.
Yeah.
And so, that's one thing we're not really good at doing. We're such individualists, and so one reason that's happening, we're not lamenting out loud. We're not reaching out for help. We're taking our fear and making it anxiety because we're trying to solve our own problems without reaching out to God or others.
Wow. So I've done a series online during COVID, fear, anxiety, depression, and I've been drawn to the word. We speak of end times, and we speak of different things. There is Scripture. Jesus set men's hearts, failing them for fear and for looking after those things that are coming on the earth. One translation, people fainting from fear and expectation of the dreadful things coming on the world. And as a pastor minister, when I speak on this and see people facing it, stuff I've had to, as you know, push through myself, more than ever, have I seen this. When I first used to evangelize in the 90s, you would preach on certain things, but now it's like right here. And so, and I know you've addressed it, but let's start before we get to anxiety and depression. That healthy fear, you had told me one time about you want an airplane pilot to have a healthy amount of fear or he's going to get careless.
Yeah, I don't want to fly with a fearless pilot.
Right. He'd care less. Yeah.
Right. I want him to check things out in healthy fear to make sure it's worthy to get in the air.
But what do you tell people when they, and trust me, I know dealing with people and walking through some issues myself, when they range from A to Z, it may sound weird to somebody else. Fear, I got a pain in my body, I bet it's going to be cancer. Some fear that, or some fear this, some fear that. In your general terms, how do you speak to do you deal with wanting people to get to the root of that and name the fears, or how do you go about that?
You bet, yeah. And I've it seems impossible, but I'm in my 29th year of seeing people, as a way of living, as a living, an occupation. And if I looked at that whole almost 30 years across the way, probably what you're talking about is the most common thing people come in with. It's got 1,000 different forms.
Yeah.
But it's fear. People dealing with how scary life is. And I think that goes back to Genesis 3 all the way through to the end. And so what I start with the basics is name the things that are scary to you. What are you afraid of? And that's what we do with our children. You know, so much of therapeutic growth is parenting people well. And so when children are afraid, they don't need speeches and they don't need a lot of information about why they shouldn't feel fear. So I say to people, rather than talk about why you shouldn't be afraid, let's talk about what you're afraid of. As crazy as you may think it is, just say out loud what it is. Because a lot of people in the COVID pandemic, they're not necessarily afraid of getting COVID. They're afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of their ailing older parents dying from this. They're afraid for their children. So it's so important in a time like this, especially in the body, that we're able to name to one another in the body what it is that I really am afraid of, in a way in which we'll be supported and heard in that.
That's an incredible point. And by the way, we have chosen to come on here off the cuff. He don't know the questions I'm asking him per se. And I know his answers are going to be great. That deal about the body, and I think one reason of that has been, you know, the Bible said confess that you might be healed. Mm-hmm. And one reason of that has been a lack of trust in thinking, well, if I tell Brother Phil I'm struggling with this, he'll think I'm nuts. Yeah. When in all reality, you're left then in isolation, which is where the devil wants you. Mm-hmm. And then you have to get people in your life that you can trust and they won't think you're crazy, because at the end of the day, I'm figuring out they got stuff too.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I think that's why the devil loves to divide.
Oh, yeah.
And not get us to, I'm not going to go talk to a counselor. I'm not going to talk to my pastor. I'm not going to talk to a brother in church. And pastors need people to talk to. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to talk to a fellow minister in our church or out of our church. I'm afraid of. But we suffer more. Do you agree with that when we don't get people to help us?
You know, DJ, we are so made for relationship. And, you know, even the movie Castaway years ago, when the Tom Hanks character was on, this guy was in the perfect environment. Like, he was perfect weather. This guy was killing himself to get back to Memphis. Like, this guy wanted, you know, like,
with a volleyball.
With a volleyball. The guy was so desperate for relationship, he got a volleyball named Wilson to leave a perfect environment to come back, because he wanted to come home. And what is home? It's where my people are. And so we sat in the theater and watched that movie, and none of us thought he was really crazy. Like, wow, we didn't think he was crazy for wanting to go home. We have home that we want to go to, and our church family is home to us.
That's great.
And so we need to reach out and experience home with one another when we're afraid.
I love that. So we see now, you know, it's, again, you didn't hear it as much. Now let's start from the young people up to whatever age you want to mention, with the no fun words of anxiety and depression, from young people to adults. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to those. I lived some of this myself in this question, you know, that got to the place that they would say, I'm depressed, and don't even have a reason to be depressed. It was confusing. And there's those losing sleep, which adds to the torment of such, the warring in the mind. And it's been a lot, as I have found out, taboo in the church until recently. I see more and more people, more and more articles, more and more books from great people in the church that saying, hang on a minute, people need help. So, by the way, email questions, djpreachit@me.com. So speak to those dreaded deals of anxiety and depression. Go a little bit into that as long as you want, because we got plenty of time here. We're way ahead of schedule. But I know one scripture we cling to, one of the translations, anxiety in the heart of a man can bring depression. It's kind of like, I've been teaching and you correct me, you're the therapist, I'm not, but I've been teaching that 2 + 2 thing that I saw happen. You know, you get the fears, and that can lead to anxiety. If you're not careful, all of that builds up to depression, and then people are in a hole they're trying to get out of. Mm-hmm. So from youth on up, speak to that while we're just seeing that mass increase and some steps to help. Because there's some people watching tonight, I guarantee you, out of this crowd, that's battling and warring in the mind with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, speaking of pandemic, we were talking earlier, you know, one thing that's happened, Pastor, is this COVID situation. It's almost like it's run a conveyor belt through life, and all kinds of anxieties and depression that we've been carrying for a long time are being thrown into the COVID territory.
That's true.
You know, so a lot of things being unmasked here. This pandemic has brought up stuff in people.
That's true.
And, you know, you're talking about, when you say anxiety and depression, you're talking about impaired forms of fear and anger. I'm going to have to explain anger for a minute. That's gotten a bad rap.
Please.
You know, so anger can sometimes be characterized as a bad thing, like he or she has an anger problem. Let me tell you a couple of terms here. When people say that, talk about anger in that context, they're talking about rage. Rage comes from terror. If a person, the classic example of kicking over chairs and screaming and, you know, fighting and getting big and that kind of thing, people that do that are pushing people away because they're terrified of their own vulnerability. You know, why is a big old man beating up somebody like that? Well, it's not because he's mad at that person as much as he's terrified of something being taken away from him. And so terrified people rage out at other people. And so anger is a very beautiful feeling because God's given us this language in us to express anger. All of the change for good in the world has come from anger, because anger is what exposes to me what I really care about. Something extremely important like Georgia football. You know, when Georgia loses or when Georgia gets a call that clearly is going against them, of course, because referees are against us. You know, when that happens, that flag goes out there, like I feel angry because I want a different outcome. I want something to be different in that game. And so that's something, you know, silly like college football. When something matters to me and I want change, I feel angry. And so the famous example of Jesus in the temple, when he cleansed the temple,
yes,
he was angry. He wanted something to change. And words like desire, yearning, hungering, thirsting, wanting, those are words of anger. And so they're famous examples, people who have made differences in civil rights and people who have made differences in government policy for good, and the evangelist of early on and evangelists now, like they want something bad enough to where they will speak out to go for it. That's what anger was given to us by God to do. Anger is that thing that says, I'm going to get up, sometimes literally, but I'm going to get up and move into a solution for something I see that I wish to be different.
Wow.
Whether it's an argument, me and my wife, a disagreement, me and my family, my brother and sister, I think are both watching this tonight. We had lots of disagreements as kids, and so, you know, I feel anger because I want something to be different. And so if I live in that way where I have access to my anger and I can want out loud, I can move toward change, I get a gift called passion. Now, passion means pain. Like I will be in pain for something that I want. And, you know, great change leaders will go through the pain of wanting, whether they get it or not. They'll go for it. And so,
you got that right.
And so, the gift of passion means I'm going to be in pain for something because I want it so badly. So therefore, if I don't deal with my anger, I will literally depress it into my heart. So depression comes from a person who has said, I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to yearn. I'm not going to desire. I'm not going to want. I'm not going to reach. I'm not going to hunger. And I'm going to thirst. I'm unplugging. I'm going to bed. Sometimes literally. And so depressed people, it's one of the reasons if you've ever tried to talk a depressed person out of being depressed, it does not work.
It don't.
It does not work. And as a matter of fact, the person talking that depressed person out of their depression will walk away angry because the depressed person makes sure someone else carries their anger. And so depression says, I will not participate in caring. I'm going to press down in my heart that which I care about, and I'm going to sometimes literally go to bed and wait till it's all over. And so anger, like we have a pandemic we can't do anything about in terms of we can't make it go away. It's here. There are things we can do to address it, which is where healthy fear comes in. We have a pandemic. Let's do smart things to deal with what's upon us. And anger is, I wish the thing wasn't here. And so people become depressed because I wish I could go to the store and I can't. I wish I could gather at church on Sunday and I can't. I wish I could get a haircut and I can't. And so rather than deal with the anger of that and talk to in the body, in the family, talking about what I wish for true that isn't, which is also grief, I will end up depressing my caring. This is too heavy to care about, and I will depress that, which ends up with depression. So that depression becomes an outgrowth of anger I'm not allowing myself to experience.
So when somebody, if you don't mind me asking,
Yeah.
put that up just a little bit more. I'm getting a couple of this. If I'm saying, let's say I'm mad that I'm depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it? Just as somebody said, I've got cancer and I'm mad.
Yeah.
If somebody's depressed, they don't want to be depressed, and it's still happening, what's the keys for them to stay out of getting into further depression because they're mad about being depressed?
Yeah, right. Circle.
I mean, like somebody, once the old school, come on, shake out of it. If somebody could, they would. It's
for
not
sure.
like, who wants to be anxious and depressed?
Right. The only payoff of depression is that it is extremely powerful. Again, depression says I don't care, and not caring or apathy is really powerful. So the payoff for a depressed person is nobody can make me care.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful thing. But again, and it's also miserable. So most people, if they could not be depressed, would not be depressed. So two areas. Sometimes there is, David says in Psalm 139, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Sometimes there is a true decrease in serotonin levels, chemically speaking, that I need to go make sure that I'm doing okay chemically. That's probably way overused. Medication is probably way overused. The tried and true way is through the doorway of grief, because every angry episode, what I'm angry for, a lot of things I don't get. Like, I'm angry about where we are, and I don't get to have the miracle cure of COVID today.
It does.
And so it opens a door to a thing called grief we talked about earlier. And so it's so important that the depressed person talks to someone, you said it a while ago, talks to someone that loves them and cares for them and will sit with them in their depression. In the book of Job, that thing got off the rails when those guys started talking. As long as they were sitting with Job, things were okay.
Big difference.
Getting better.
That's true.
So the most important thing is to sit with people in their depression as they grieve their powerlessness over not being able to change the things they wish they could change. So grief and depression run very, very much in parallel tracks. So to be able to come to one another in the body, in the family, in the nuclear family, or in the church family, it's going to require a whole lot of willingness to sit still in my own feelings as people who are experiencing depression tell me what they wish was true that isn't. And then that opens that doorway to grief and help them walk through that grief as well, the loss they're experiencing.
Wonderful. Got an email, and I'll keep all these anonymous. Somebody mentioned that they knew some people that had extreme anxiety over health fears. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that a while ago. But since COVID-19, their anxiety has been at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. So the question was, what could be said to help people like that? Okay, I've got a lot of health fears. I don't feel it during COVID, but how do you help them as things go back to normal and they struggle or fear the struggle of a return to, oh God, that old anxiety?
I was just going to say, that sets them up for the anxiety of when the COVID's over, the anxiety comes back. There's a thing called, this I don't want to get real scientific, but it's called a negative feedback loop. And people can get into a feedback loop that is wherever they are in the loop is setting up for the next chapter. And so that's a very wise question the person's asking there. And what can happen is, I'm going to tell you a personal story briefly.
Sure.
My maternal grandfather was my first and probably remains my main kind of hero in life. And he was my guy when I was a little boy and then on up. He died when I was in my 20s. I did not realize the effect he had on my life. He had a terrible phobia of cancer. He was so desperately afraid of cancer. And I didn't realize that he was leaving his fear of cancer in my lap, not meaning to, but he would talk about cancer and it's rough and it's terrible and one day it'll get you. And, he was just so scared of it. He was just obsessed with it as he got older. Yeah. He didn't realize he was leaving things. This is a great opportunity, DJ, for people in this kind of break, in the COVID break people are getting, to pay attention to what are some stories I have inside of me? What are some memories I have inside of me where this anxiety over my health could have come from in the first place? And I did not realize until I did exactly what that person's asking about. I had an episode to where I was where they are. I had something that happened in my life, and it brought me to a place to where that particular anxiety was way less. And that's when I started thinking about and remembering that as much as I loved that man, as much as I stepped in every footprint he left in front of me if I could, one thing he inadvertently left me was this huge fear, anxiety around health and cancer in particular. There's a word for that. It's called a legacy burden. And it's very akin to the sins of the fathers being visited on generations in the future. And so it's very possible. I don't believe for a minute that we called him Granddaddy. I don't believe for a minute that my granddaddy meant to or wanted to or premeditated throwing something in my lap that's going to burden me for years.
No.
But he did. In his humanness. He left something in my lap for me to carry. And so it's a very important time for the person that sent that email. It'd be a great time to inventory what am I carrying that's been handed to me, on purpose or not, that the enemy's using to really poke me and punch me with, that this has given me. So this is a great opportunity to go take a look, not to blame people. I don't blame my granddaddy for that. I love him much as I ever did. And I can tell the truth about, as I looked at that, he really laid that in my lap, and I carried it around for a long time. And it wasn't mine, it was his. And so a lot of anxiety is carried fear from other people, even people that we love and care about, that isn't ours to carry.
Wow.
We've carried it for so long, all we know to do is carry it. This is a great time in this break in that to pay attention to where did that thing show up in the first place.
That's wonderful. So I get another email, and the person that sent this email had no earthly idea my next subject, and so it's incredible. If I could show you both of these, you'd be like, wow. So we're going to switch subjects. Email djpreachit@me.com. Just because I'm switching subjects don't mean I won't come back. I know you speak on this and help people with, and we've mentioned the word 3 or 4 times tonight. We want to dig around with grief. There's people watching tonight, lost family members. Some, they knew it was coming, some unexpectedly, friend, spouse, sister, brother. What's that all about when, pow, it hits me. The funeral's over, and the cards and the cake, and well wishes stopped coming, and I was just with that person, and now here I am, and here comes grief. And so I mentioned that. So let me go ahead and get to the email that ties with it. This is appropriate for my situation, grieving for lost her spouse, and has gone from anger that he was taken from me, like a heart attack, to fear of being on my own for the first time in my life. We were married almost 42 years.
Oh, goodness.
I left my parents home when we got married. I've had several rounds of major depression throughout my life, but this is totally overwhelming. How can I get myself to go on? And I think that tied in with that. Speak to that for a while. So we got the grief of the family member. Yeah,
my goodness, what a beautiful and sad question. I'm so glad whoever sent that in. DJ, at its core, sadness and lament, which I said a while ago, lament is the outward expression of sadness, of grief. And I wish this was my quote, and it's not, but I read, don't remember who it is attributed to, a person wrote that grief is our recognition that love is stronger than death.
Wow.
Death doesn't stop love, because my sadness shows how much I love.
That's powerful.
Isn't that beautiful?
It's beautiful.
And so sadness is a natural response to loss, because sadness is how we honor memory, and sadness is how we lament what was not present that we wish had been present, what will never be present again that we miss so much. And so the person's asking a great question because they're caught in the middle of, I'm so angry, I wish this were different. Out of the blue, my spouse was taken from me. And now that's settling in on me, and the sadness door is opening. And the sadness is like in the old movies, the smoke of sadness is coming in. And what can happen is anxiety sets in with the fear, because I remember one of the worst memories of my life is I was present when my dad passed away. And I remember in those moments a chilling fear. I was 43 when he died, and I was chilled with, I've never been on earth without this man before. I've never not had him on the earth with me. And so this person is experiencing the same thing. Since I left my parents' home, I've never not been with my spouse. And so it's going to be easy for the enemy and humanists to jump in there and go, yeah, what if? And a good working definition of anxiety is asking the question, what if, and trying to answer it over and over again.
Yeah.
And so, it can be part of the work for this person that wrote this in is like to go ahead and inventory. It's a very antiseptic sounding thing, but a grief inventory that lists what are all the things that I miss about the spouse and what he or she brought to my life. This idea of naming it is so important. And for this person to sit down and write about, these are the specific things that I miss. These are the things that we did not get to do or did not get to say that I wish that we had gotten to do or gotten to say. And then sometimes that will even rekindle anger, which can be a really good thing to get this person out of bed, maybe literally, but certainly emotionally and metaphorically, to move forward. It's often we talk about move on. It's really moving forward. This person will never move on from that spouse.
That's great. That's the truth.
And so that inventory allows that person to articulate and name what the loss is, to honor memory of the spouse, and then to allow this person to walk in more quote unquote anger, more passion to move forward, because respect has been given to what was.
So the person, whether it's spouse, family member, friend, what can they do with everything they're experiencing and feeling? And if only, man, I wish I'd have said this to you. I wish I'd apologized. I wish I'd have spent more time. And like you said, the enemy comes in with that smoke. And what is those steps maybe to, because I don't think anybody can look at somebody in grief and just say, like you said, come on, snap out of it, get over it. That's crazy.
No.
But what about those that live with those, oh, man, I missed this. I wish I'd have done that. And then the enemy comes in with those feelings of regret on that grief. How do you counsel people on that when they say, well, I didn't get to tell them I'm sorry, or I didn't get to tell them
The very first person I sat across from in 1991, I'll change the details. It's 30 years ago. Let me change the details. She had a very, very violent argument with her mother, went into the next room to kind of try to cool down, came back out, and her mother had passed away in the next room. And that was the very last thing they had done, is had this very violent argument. And so those things can stick with you. Here's what this gets into. If anyone out there is familiar with 12-step recovery, gets into a 12-step recovery principle, is recognizing powerlessness over ever being able to do any or everything comprehensively. Like there are things I have that are left unsaid with my wife, my siblings, my fellow church members, my elders that I serve with. So we are humans that we need to recognize our powerlessness over all the omnis that God is. I can't be omnipresent, and I can't be omniscient.
Well, this is great, folks.
I can't be any of those. And so part of this is recognizing I'm powerless. I don't even have the capacity to remember everything I need or want to say to the people I love. I don't have it. And so that's where I turn to him like I do everything else and say, I am insufficient. I alone am not enough. And I did not end the way I wanted to end. I didn't say what I wanted to say. And like I said, both of my parents are gone, and that's true for me with both of them. And so part of it is recognizing that in my humanness, I'm always going to get to the end of every day and every relationship with it being incomplete. And here's something,
That's
DJ,
powerful.
it's so true and intuitive and so easy to forget when I'm in the throes of grief. And here's something we lose track of, even in the body of Christ. Every human relationship on earth, not in eternity, but every relationship on earth ends badly. People move away, someone don't want to be my friend, divorce, death, a phone call in the middle of the night, a long lingering death. So on the earth, we lose track of the fact that every relationship I have is going to end in a painful way. There's no other way to end. If the longest relationship in the world is somebody dies.
This is mic drop stuff.
So, we lose that with technology. And a friend of mine in Texas used to say, back in the dark ages, they were far more spiritual than we are, because they thought that evil spirits were in charge of people dying so young. And somebody came along and said, "No, I think if we started washing our hands, we'd live longer." Like, it wasn't spiritual warfare after all; it was just bacteria. And so the world became less mysterious. Well, we've got a world where we have very little mystery, DJ. We don't live in much mystery because technology figures it out, medicine figures it out, something figures out a solution. So we've been able to really sanitize death and sanitize how much loss we have. And so we get back to the basics, that one of the things that you've married couples for years like I did, and they look at one another, and I did it, and you did it with your wife, and look at that person and say, "Till death do us part." Well, we're making a proclamation in public that I recognize this is going to end painfully. I hope it ends painfully in 65 years or whatever, but it's going to end painfully. And so even the simple act of going back to, okay, I recognize that grief is a part of living. Loss is the most common experience we have as human beings.
Wow. And I'll leave this anonymous. They said, "Thanks for asking the question about the things we didn't get to do with lost loved ones. I never got to hug one of their kin folks before he passed. I just knew he would come out of the hospital, but it haunted me ever since. Try my best to not let that guilt eat me up inside. I needed the answer he gave on that."
Oh, great.
So it's been worth that.
Glad to hear it.
When you, being a pastor and counselor, how do you answer that question on grief or anything else? Let's say grief, tragedy, trauma, and I'm going to get to some of that later, but let's say anything in life when that now turns into, "I am royally mad at God.
Yeah.
You could have stopped this," on any subject. How do you address that?
Boy, I got to clean out my own clock first, because I have said that so many times.
Like, no, yeah.
What do you mean doing this? And, there is such a picture all through Scripture of, theologians call it immanence. God is near and transcendent. God is other. And so we deal with a line between his immanence and his transcendence, and the line between being able to be his children and bring our protest to him, and recognize that he is holy and he is other. And I have found, and I know God hears all and knows all, but I have found there is such, as crazy as it sounds maybe, there is such power and freedom in being able to go. We touched on it earlier, be able to go to someone, a human being, and say, "DJ, you're my friend, and let's have a cup of coffee. I got to rail for a little bit. And I got to rail about our daddy. I got to rail about dad. Two brothers railing about dad. That sounds so fundamental. I don't say that in any way to be disrespectful to the Lord, but like sometimes the brothers and sisters and sisters have to get together and talk about dad, not because dad's in the wrong. Dad knows what he's doing. But the children have a very difficult time remembering that sometimes. This one does. And so sometimes it's so important to go ahead and admit, because, again, anger says, "I want this to be different."
Yes.
And it's not. And you're all powerful, which, by the way, DJ, is a powerful act of worship, to say to him, "I know you're all, I'm so mad at you, but I know you're all powerful and could have changed it," and you didn't.
Yeah.
And that's where we eventually work into, because most people, DJ, who are railing like that, me for sure, who are around like that, when I'm doing that, I eventually get to a place, and here's our word again, I eventually get to a place of very profound grief. I want to be different, and it isn't, and I know you know what you're doing, and I'm so sad at my powerlessness, and somehow this was the way it needed to be, and I don't understand it, and I hate it.
Yeah.
And I grieve my powerlessness to make it different, and I grieve that I'm not you, and I know that you are you.
That's powerful. Wow. I'm going to skip again.
All right?
And the first one is, I'm sorry, it's not much question to this, but I notice on some of the things you deal with, it's a big deal today. Speak to some of the advice or help, maybe the roots on helping people with addiction, whatever that addiction is. Yeah.
There's a colloquial definition for addiction. I'm really glad you asked that because the incidence, the prevalence of addiction in this COVID thing is skyrocketing. All addiction is, I'm going to give you 3 definitions. Let me give you the real scientific one first. Addiction is a pathological relationship. Pathos means painful or sick. A pathological relationship with an ego defense mechanism, which means a real life relationship, a sick one, with a thing. It can be a substance or a behavior, with a thing that props up my illusion of being powerful, that continues despite negative consequences. That's a scientific definition, one of them. A better working definition is addiction is an attempt to live fully without paying the price of full living. The shortcut way to say that is addiction is anything I go to get away from these pesky feelings I have about where I am in my life. Ah. And so I'm in quarantine, I don't have my freedom, I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm stuck in my house, I can't go to work, or I lost my job, or whatever it is, and I want something to either put in me or act out of me to make this go away temporarily. The hook of addiction is the fact that it delivers temporary anesthesia. I can be numb temporarily, and this all goes away. And it is a powerful draw. Wow. And so I've got all these things I can't control. Well, I can drink or act out, or pornography, or other things, or food, or, there's a reason all the memes are coming out about sweatpants. People are eating like crazy, and they're afraid they're eating their feelings. It's like, I come from a history of that, so I do understand. It can, the use of food can be an addictive cycle all of its own. Yeah. And so an addiction is just a cycle I get into that becomes a go-to to get me away from how powerfully angry or afraid or guilty or full of shame or scared, whatever it is I am.
That's the truth. Mm-hmm. And real quick, how does a minister, how do we get them to see turning to God versus that addiction?
Yeah. Look at the time, DJ. We got to go.
Yeah, that's
no. Here's what I have said from my version of the pulpit here is that back to the same principle. Alcoholics Anonymous is an amazing organization because they took the principles of the New Testament and the church and put it into AA rooms. Because you walk into an AA meeting, everyone in that room is there for one reason. They are struggling with something they're powerless over. And so the body of Christ, we're struggling with something. It's called life that we're powerless over, but we know who has the power. And so we come and worship the God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that inhabits us to grant us the power, the dunamis, the dynamite, to go and to live. But so what we say to our flock, to the sheep that are listening to us is, first and foremost, tell the truth. It's called an admission. Tell the truth of what you're doing to get away from these feelings, to medicate yourself. Call it what it is. It's called making an admission, which can be thought of with mission, admission, the Latin prefix add, with mission, with other people in the body. Get to someone in the body that you trust and tell them what you're doing to get away, to get that temporary anesthesia injected in you. AA calls that, I admitted I'm powerless over alcohol. My life has become unmanageable. So what happens when it's unmanageable? Anxiety takes over, and I try to put the pieces back together myself. Therefore, I stay in secret.
Wow. What does a family how does a family work with someone they love? We see this in life. And that person simply not trying to change. What are some ways when that person is not ready to see their addiction gone or help, without getting into that enabling stuff, which don't make it better?
No, gosh, that is so frustrating. That's a question of great frustration. And, there's a lot of debate about this, but a lot of people believe that addiction is a disease process. The American Medical Association said about 40 years ago that a disease is phenomenological. In other words, it can be observed. It is progressive and is often fatal if not treated. So the American Medical Association decades ago said this fits the criteria for disease. And so if you look, and some people disagree with that, but if you just take that concept, addiction is the only disease that must be self-diagnosed. It has to be self-diagnosed to be treated.
Right.
Someone else can diagnose it all day long. And you can diagnose physiological issues like diabetes, for example. But until the person who's caught in the addictive cycle makes his own or her own diagnosis, it will remain untreated. And so that's where we get into logistical issues like how do I not enable this person that's in the throes of a chemical addiction, for instance? When do I know when to tell them you can't live here, or I can't give you any more money? And those things are kind of fluid questions to answer. But the one thing is to talk very, very straight to your loved one. Let the loved one know what is going on in your life as a result of their addiction. And let me tell you 4 quick things that the addict who will not see what's going on is doing. There are 4 rules of denial.
Okay.
Don't see, don't say, don't feel, and don't need. And you can say to your loved one, this person asked a question. Say to your loved one, I'm just going to say he, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but just for brevity. I know that you're not seeing this. I see it. And here, let me tell you what I see. I'm not asking you if you agree or not. This is not an agreement conversation. Yeah. This is what I see. And I'm going to say out loud what's happening with me, with you, as a result of this addiction. Yeah. And here, my feelings, I'm angry at what's happening, and I'm really afraid if this continues, that it's going to end really badly. And I need you to take a look at this and seek some help. And that way you're modeling moving out of denial and calling things what they are.
That's it.
And expressing need.
Wonderful. So we got about 12 minutes, 12, 13. Okay. I won't get into all the spiritual side of this, but we see a need today. I mean, social media's proved that. I need you to like me, comment, brag on me. I'm going to take a picture of myself. Why do we see so many self-worth issues? And name 2 or 3 if you got 2 or 3. Do you counsel any of that? And how do you, is that rooted in insecurity? Does that bring a lot of problems in people's life? Self-worth.
Yeah. There are some things that human beings cannot tolerate. And like rejection, humiliation, and abandonment. Now, those are 3 things we just cannot tolerate. By the way, the 3 things Jesus experienced his entire earthly life, certainly on the cross and on the way to it. So we humans can't stand to experience those things. And so this idea, the thing called codependency comes up. And codependency has been bandied about a lot. But codependency is simply having an external view of the world, looking out here first, then doing or saying or acting in whatever way I need to act in order to not be abandoned. And so you may have seen I don't remember the article where it's from, but there was an article that the developers of the smartphone were looking for a way to create a device in which people would have anxiety if they weren't checking it and would have anxiety if they were.
Yeah.
And they did it. And social media has leveraged that. And so every time I get a like on an Instagram picture or a like on Facebook, that lets me know that I'm not going to be abandoned. That's not true.
No.
But those little red hearts and those things, that gives me an external sign that people are with me. And so I become dependent on that codependently, because if everything's okay out here, everything must be okay, and I must be okay. And so the addictive pull to social media is the idea that humans, we have a tendency to look outside ourselves anyway to make sure I don't get abandoned or humiliated or rejected. And so every time I get a like, that means, man, I'm accepted. People want me. They're not going to reject me. And when I don't get enough, I better work harder, take a better selfie, do more Photoshop, to make sure I'm okay out here. It's an external focus.
It's real, too.
Oh, man.
And don't you agree? You don't have to agree, but you're a lot smarter than me on this. It's never enough. If you like my stuff today, I'm going to need you to do it tomorrow. It's a never-ending deal, right?
For sure.
And maybe that's why Christ said, or Paul said, we're complete in him, in his presence, his fullness. I believe there's a custom God-sized hole that no amount of likes or cars or homes or lands or money or relationships can fill but his presence, right?
That's absolutely right.
And here's the deal. If he likes us, we're all in good shape.
That's right. And Scripture says he really does.
He really
does. He really does.
I won't try to move through this. I just had somebody text me and said, please don't stop. He's so good. Big deal today, divorce. And those that are crushed from it didn't sign up for it, and it affects the kids as they move forward. What's a couple of next steps on? That's another traumatic thing that we don't realize has happened to people. A lot of it's not their fault.
That's right. So the question is how to move forward through divorce?
Yeah, those that are crushed from it, and you got kids involved, and maybe how to move forward to even give way to the next relationship if possible.
Yeah, that is I have walked through those days. It is so scary, and I believe it's spiritual, DJ, for sure. The word Jesus uses in Luke to be torn asunder. That Greek phrase means a violent stripping away of members. It's a picture of a branch being ripped off of a tree. It's just a very violent act. And so when we experience divorce, it is an act of great violence. And so the first thing is to be able to, kind of what we said a little bit before, to be able to sit down in the quiet, maybe with a friend, with the Lord, both, and just be able to lament what the losses are. What are the losses in this? And certainly we know intuitively to say to our children, you didn't do this. Because here's what happens, DJ, when abandonment occurs in the life of a child, a daddy leaves, a mama leaves, that child will immediately begin looking for what they did wrong. And deeper than that, they'll start looking at how they're made wrong to cause it.
My.
I wasn't athletic enough, or I wasn't musical enough, or I was too loud, or I was too soft, or if I were a boy or if I were a girl. So children will find out how they're constitutionally no good and how they behaved badly to make this happen. And so that's how we intuitive parents know to say this isn't your fault. Well, because kids are working very hard to find a reason for this, and they find the reason to be their own inadequacy. So the first thing for this person is to attend to the children, not just to say you didn't cause this, but to make sure these children know you are made right because the maker doesn't mess up.
No.
You're made right, and you did not cause this, and you were enough and adequate, and you're made exactly like God wanted you to be made. And what you did or didn't do had nothing to do with this, first and foremost. And then to attend to our children in that way. And then secondly, to take a step back and to take a look at what the lament is inside of that and the anger. What do I wish to be different? Of course, I desire to still be married, but what do I wish to be different? What do I wish I had done? Not in terms of beating myself up, but to help me see as I move forward, if there is a future with another person, what do I need to be taking a look at, and to make sure I'm dealing with fear and anger in particular, and certainly sadness and grief.
So real quick, I'm sorry to repeat. Deal with fear and anger going into the next marriage. What would that look like? Anger of a while ago you talked about anger and rage being different. So explain that again on how, if I'm going to move forward, why would you say fear and anger moving forward with a marriage?
Here's what can happen. A person doesn't deal with those two things, and they turn into, I don't like doing that. And they turn into rage or anxiety and depression. And so just give a quick, for instance, let's say, and I don't know anything about this particular situation, of course, but let's say that the man had been unfaithful in the marriage, and that was part of what the divorce was about. Well, if the wife is not dealing with how scary that was to have that happening and she not know about it, she can become anxious, and there's this phrase called hyper-vigilance. Her holding vigil, her watching can become hyper.
Yeah.
She can start looking, and it turns into kind of a paranoia. And so,
it'll happen again.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if she doesn't deal with that, it becomes this anxious hyper-vigilance.
Yeah.
And then her sadness turns into a thing called self-pity.
Yeah.
And she'll start demanding to not ever have to be sad. And so if she's in another relationship and her husband is 10 minutes late from where he was, she has an explosion of rage because she's not dealt with how scary it was to be in that situation in her first marriage, for instance. And so fear will lead us to wisdom. Anger will lead us to passion. Sadness will lead us to acceptance. And so if we're dealing with those three feelings well in a divorce situation, then we're going to be able to walk better into the next one because I'm dealing with those things well.
Just had a question pop in on that. My ex-husband left when my youngest was 1 year old. He didn't know him, but I know one day questions will come.
Yeah.
So how do I contain my fear and anxiety on this?
Yeah.
How do I handle it?
Great question there, because yes, that child will ask the question for sure.
So how do you contain the fear and anxiety, and how do you handle it?
Yeah. This person, does this say if it's a male or female?
Female.
Okay. She will need to find a godly woman to sit with her and for her to be able to pour out her lament, because she's not going to, a divorce, if it's described, if Jesus himself said it's a violent stripping away of members, she's not made to contain that kind of violence.
Yeah.
And so rather than contain the violence that's happened, she needs to be talking out loud about the violent trauma that has occurred. Mm-hmm. And so if she can get with a godly person, a godly woman, or a therapist or a pastoral counselor, come to her pastor or someone to say, this is going on, these are my losses, this is what I'm so angry about, and I need to deal with this so when my 1 year old is 10 years old and ask that question, I'm able to answer the question in a way that is truthful but not harmful to this child growing up. And so that will happen by not trying to contain, because she will implode or explode if she attempts to contain all of that violent trauma.
That's incredible. I guess I'm right at the end here. How does a person, when they take whatever happened and the devil comes in, how do they forgive themselves? Because you can't change or undo if you're the one that caused the pain, whatever happened in your life. How do you counsel that person to say, look, you're a child of God now, you've been forgiven. Mm-hmm. Don't let this beat you up the rest of your life.
I'm going to give you a weird passage to answer that question. It is in some ways impossible for me to forgive myself, because forgiveness is a passive act. I receive forgiveness, so I can't give and receive at the same time. You know, I can't hand myself the mic. I've already got it. So, like, I can't hand. So, you remember in Genesis, DJ, where Noah, the flood has ended, the water has receded, they've gone out, and Noah plants a vineyard and gets drunk, and he sins, and his sons, one son comes in and dishonors him in his nakedness, and two sons walk into the tent backward and cover his
Correct.
sin, cover his nakedness. I think that is such a picture of what we call forgiving ourselves. Like, I've really messed up. I've really done this or that. And here I'm lying here in a state of exposure and vulnerability. I can't do it for myself. And God in his grace walks in, not to shame me, and covers me with his forgiveness. Noah received a covering.
Wow.
When he was naked and vulnerable and shameful. And so the first time I read that verse, I think I thought of that. Like, this is God. This is a picture of God bringing in a covering for me, not shaming. Those boys walked in backward. And the enemy, not literally, but the first son that came in, that's so what the enemy does. He loves to dance around and make fun and carry on. And so these other two sons came in and covered his shame. And that, to me, is such an act. I'm lying there naked and vulnerable and in my shame, and God's grace and forgiveness comes and covers me because I can't do it myself.
Well, final one, and you deal a lot with, and you can answer this quick. I know time is short. You deal a lot with trauma, and that's a loaded subject. Boom, life happened. They never dreamed. Maybe comment a little bit on how you deal with trauma, and then also on it. Have you seen trauma? If not dealt with, can it lead to other things such as anxiety, depression? Maybe name a few steps before we close.
Yeah. Okay. Trauma is, by definition, it is something that has created adversity, an adverse circumstance, an adverse event that has created emotional disruption. What the technical is what. So when we have emotional disruption, sometimes secondary to physical disruption, it's traumatizing to get beaten up, for example. So my emotional trauma is secondary to the physical trauma I've received. So trauma boils down to an emotional response. And so trauma must be dealt with on an emotional level to address the true trauma, no matter what form it takes on the outside. A car wreck, being beaten, divorce, sudden death, those kinds of things. Those are all external things, but the damage is in here.
True.
And so, for instance, this is a true story. When I was in seminary in Fort Worth, the campus is between the north end of town and the hospital district in downtown, but the hospitals are really close to the seminary campus. And these life flight helicopters would come over. It looked like you could see the pilot sitting in. They're really low because they're getting close to the hospitals. And I was walking out of the student center with a friend of mine who had been in Vietnam for 3 tours. And just during Desert Storm. I was in school in 90 to 92. And he's a big boy. And we walked out of the student center, and one of those choppers came over, and I was under him before I could say, don't do it. Post-traumatic stress is what he was dealing with. And so what happens is when we're traumatized, if we don't have expression of the pain, the expression of the emotional trauma, the limbic brain, and I won't get into a whole bunch of that, but the limbic brain captures that information and stores it. And so when we hear external triggers, or we hear a song or a helicopter or have a memory, it triggers a traumatic reaction, and our body goes into that fight or flight. Cortisol increases. And so, again, letting words speak. Our hearts are made to, our brains are made to express the heart, DJ. And what happens in trauma, our brains are used to block the heart. And so the trauma stays lodged in that limbic area of the brain and in the heart and remains there and gets decayed and calloused over. So when we're triggered, it pops out. And so the deal is talk about the trauma, name the trauma, normalize the pain. Let the amygdala, which is the gatekeeper of the limbic brain, let it settle down. Hippocampus is where memories are stored. Hippocampus increases as I get relief from through relationship. We're impaired through relationship, and we're repaired the same way. And so if you get repaired through a relationship, someone's with me in my trauma, the anxiety, the hyper-vigilance, and the depression goes down because I have an outlet for that to be handled redemptively.
It's incredible, folks. I told you he was good. And I'm asking, if you just now logged on, go back. We had a few issues. We finally got our mics and turned them up, different things. It's no big deal. It's worth the whole thing. Fear, anxiety, depression, anger, rage, grief, trauma, different things, divorce, self-worth. We've dealt with all of that in about an hour tonight. I'm begging. You say, well, I just got in on this. Go back. It's going to be archived when we finish tonight. And I appreciate Brother Phil coming. Sage Hill Counseling is who you're with, right? Yep. And his office is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And they have several therapist counselors there, including him. And we appreciate him. I'm going to put him on the spot. I hope he don't get me after this.
Uh-oh.
So give us a 30 to 45 second deal for people that's very anxious right now, and would like a few tips on trying to push out of that panic and anxiousness right now.
Yeah, I love ending that way. Let me give you 3 phrases, and they're very simple and very profound. Those in 12-step recovery will recognize it. Celebrate Recovery, Regeneration, those kinds of ministries.
Yeah.
But feel your feelings. tell the truth about what you're feeling, and then surrender the outcome to God and others. So if I will deal with this heart, tell the truth about this heart, tell the truth to other people and to God about this heart, the outcome belongs to him ultimately, and that's my way of recognizing that he does.
That's it. And the Bible says a word fitly spoken, like apples of gold and pictures of silver. What he just said in the last 30 seconds is awesome. God bless you. Brother Jonathan, thank you for coming and helping us tonight as well. And Brother Phil, it's an honor to have you tonight. We love you. God